PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi.
My new book, King's Anti-Sicilians for Black, is published this week. I'm really pleased with it. Lovely hardback book, very clean design, lovely layout. Published by New in Chess. You can get it directly from New in Chess. I'll put the link down below. The book deals with all those lines where White declines to go in for an open Sicilian, like the Rossolimo, closed Sicilian Mora Gambit, the Alapin Grand Prix attack, and it's a repertoire for Black. And of course, it's a companion volume to the Kalashnikov Sicilian, which is an open Sicilian. It's a version of my Chessable course, so which is still on sale. I mean, if you're more interested in an online format, then you can still get that. But anyway, delighted it's out. I want to show you my recommendation against the Alapin. So White plays c3. That's the Alapin, intending to build a centre with d4. And you could say the main moves are knight f6 and d5. But there's a lot to learn in those systems. And I think White's doing fine in them. I mean, there's no particular problem. But I've really enjoyed playing e6 over many years, actually. Very simple idea. You're going to match White in the centre by playing pawn to d5. So d4, d5. Now, as I've noted before, it's possible for White to go into an advance French, but most of my opponents took on d5. And we're heading for an IQP position. I want to show you a couple of games very briefly. So this one is actually a bullet game, but still it's quite instructive. So Daniel Naroditsky playing White against Magnus Carlsen playing Black. Yes, Carlsen plays this with Black, as has Kasparov, for example. So, it's completely reliable if those two are playing it. And me, of course. So, knight f6. Actually, my preferred move order in the course is knight c6, but knight f6 is fine as well. Yeah, we transpose quite quickly. Bishop d6. An exchange on c5, so you can see we've got an isolated queen's pawn as Black. And I really like that because it gives Black space. And when you've got space, you can maneuver your pieces more easily. Now, the e-file is open. And Naroditsky decides to play rook e1 check. Previously, Carlsen has faced knight d4, which puts a bit of pressure here. This was against Kostyuk. I give this as one of my model games in the book, actually. And he just castled. Because taking this pawn is absolutely fatal. But anyway, do check it out in the book. It's a brilliant IQP game from Carlsen. But in this game, rook e1 check was played, and bishop e6 blocks. Now, it looks as though Black might be in trouble if, for example, this bishop is attacked with one of these moves. But let's have a look. This wasn't played, and rightly so, because after knight g5, there's a trick. And queen b6 picks up the bishop. Okay, what about knight d4? That looks more solid. Well, in fact, Black just castles. And it's really inadvisable to take this pawn, because you can see the f-file opens. Look, these pieces converge on that weak f2 pawn. And, well, you can see, look at White's pieces on the queen side. Well, White's been grabbing this pawn. He's neglected his development. And Black has an absolutely glorious attacking position. So it's not possible to grab that pawn, or very unwise to. So Naroditsky played bishop e3, sensible, to eliminate this bishop. And Carlsen exchanged and castled. And then knight d2. Well, if White has a chance to get a blockade on d4 with one of these knights, then it's okay for white. But it's black's move, and black can take the initiative with this move, queen b6. Looking in two directions, very often after these bishops are exchanged, then b6 is a splendid square for the queen. And looking through to b2, so yeah, bishop a4, queen takes b2 is absolutely possible. So Naroditsky exchanged on c6. Remember, this was a bullet game, but they both players played pretty well. But this is exactly what black wants in this kind of position. So the pawn supports the pawn on d5, and black simply has more control in the center, which gives black the chance to maneuver and take control, actually. So this is still a threat. So knight b3 and now c5. So you can see these pawns control all these beautiful squares. Lovely center. So, you know, basically Carlsen's come out of this opening extremely well. And there's already a threat to perhaps play c4 and take here. So queen c2 and rook b8. So c4, pushing the knight, is a threat, and then take on b2. Rook e2 defends that. And Carlsen plays in a very thematic way, advancing the a-pawn, so just putting more pressure on that knight. And yeah, I mean, this is the normal kind of strategic move. In fact, bishop g4 instead is a really good shot, because black is going to be able to damage the pawns. There's no satisfactory defense. I mean, if this knight hops back, then b2 hangs. If queen d3, then c4. So basically black is going to be able to exchange on f3, which is obviously good for black. I repeat, it's a bullet game. So a5, of course, Carlsen just plays a normal strategic move. Once again, bishop g4 is very strong, but h6, just making sure there's no funny business with knight g5. And then a4, the knight is driven back. Still looks really nice for black. Maybe Carlsen was intending doubling on the b file. Who knows? Knight e5. And now he decides to push with d4. Normally, of course, it would be a very good idea to, you know, create a passed pawn, open up this bishop. It looks really nice. It just so happens that it actually loses a pawn because of this knight fork. Nevertheless, even dropping a pawn, black is all right here, because that pawn on a4 squeezes these pawns here. Nice minority attack. And the knights in the middle actually lack decent support. So yeah, this is a bit chancy for white. In fact, it peters out to a draw very quickly. Rook c4, it doesn't win material because of a check. The rook comes back, the queen comes back, and the repeated moves, and the game ended in a draw. So an interesting little encounter, but it's just worth bearing in mind that this check on e1 isn't a problem. You can just block, and actually f2 can be a bit vulnerable. After the exchange of bishops, the queen stands very well on b6. And this pawn structure is usually desirable for black, because it gives black the chance to build a lovely center with c5 and positionally controlling the center. It's better for black. Now, very quickly, let me show you another game in this system. So this is played in the Serbian Championship in 2023. Stefan Tadic, who I believe is an international master, against Ivanisevic. And started out like this. Again, d4, d5, an exchange on d5, and knight f3. Now, in the book and in the chessable course, I recommend knight c6 as the desired move order. But Ivanisevic plays a6, and this is a move I've also dabbled with, actually, and I quite like it. You know, it's actually in some ways very aggressive, because you're waiting with the bishop, you're hoping that white is going to take here, and then you've saved the tempo. a6 can be a useful move. Yes, I know there's a special place in hell for players that play these little pawn moves at the side of the board. This one can be useful because the bishop is able to drop back. It will prevent a knight coming in here, which might attack the queen on one of these squares. It's an interesting move and restricts the bishop here. Bishop e3. Now that forces the issue. So black has to do something about this. Can actually push on, but an exchange on d4. So we have, once again, an IQP position, an isolated queen's pawn. And I like these for black very much because you have space. And knight f6. Now white decides to develop with the fianchetto. So that means, seems to be a very solid kingside formation. The danger is if you play the bishop out, let's say out here, then bishop d6 and h2 is always going to be an issue. So presumably that's why g3 was played. And it does look very solid, and the bishop looks at the d5 pawn. This next move for black I like a lot. You can just go knight c6 here. But bishop g4. Now in the Kalashnikov, in my course there, I called this bishop move the poke. It's an annoying attack to the queen. The queen either has to move, which there might not be a great square for the queen, or you have to play f3. And also, if the queen moves, you might just back up the bishop with queen d7 and then maybe go bishop h3 to weaken the king. So that's an interesting possibility. And yeah, where does the queen move to? If queen d3, then knight c6, and that knight could hop into e5. If queen b3, then knight c6 and knight a5, and that one actually loses the queen. So perhaps it's understandable that white played f3, just pushing the bishop back. But now that bishop isn't too happy on g2 because it's blocked in. Rook e8, of course, that's where the rook needs to go on the open file. Knight c6. So black is very solidly developed. There aren't any problems with the pawn on d5. A lot of people get worried about the weakness of the isolated queen's pawn. It's just not an issue in this position at all. It's impossible for white to attack it. And black is ready to play queen c7. As we'll see, this can be useful. Now, white starts a plan with taking on c6. Now, as we've seen in the last game, it's desirable for black to have these two pawns in the middle. They might well advance. And black has a greater share of the centre. But this was white's idea, to control c5. And then you're controlling d4. And in that way, white gets a kind of footprint in the middle. But even so, this can be very useful for black. a5, so following up, Carlsen's strategy of advancing the a pawn. And yeah, this can be a very useful minority attack against these pawns. That's very thematic. Queen d2, queen c7, so the rooks are connected. Queen f2, right. So this looks positionally quite desirable to take control over the c5 square. But black is very solid here. So a4, knight d5. So this is useful to advance this pawn, just squeezing the pawns here. But now we see black's strategy coming together. So far, it looks like white is, maybe achieving something with this blockade on c5. But watch this move. h5. You see, f3 not only blocked in the bishop, but it created a weakness. g3 is just a little bit more sensitive now that the pawn has advanced to f3. Bishop d4, yeah, okay, nice occupation of these squares, but black doesn't care. It's all about the king side. You can see this as being softened up, and there are three pieces attacking, so white has to make a decision. By the way, if white exchanges here, black is fine. The king is actually perfectly safe on f8. It's not an issue. Okay, well, what about f4? Because that blocks out the queen and bishop. But then this square can be occupied. So black would exchange and play knight e4. Queen e3, bishop f5, and black is going to move the second rook to the e file, and then the rook will swing over to g6 or h6. And in combination with that knight on e4, wow, what a piece. That is a fantastic attack for black. Okay, what about exchanging it off? The problem is then that bishop has a route in to f3 and quite possibly following up with rook e6 and rook h6 again. So f4 certainly doesn't solve white's problems and now allows black in. So white came up with another idea to do something about g3. Basically, an exchange on e8, rook e1, an exchange of rooks. Gave up the pawn on g3, but black has an issue with the pawn on a4. That's not so easy to defend. The queen doesn't really want to run away when there's sort of possibilities to come down here. However, this side of the board is completely irrelevant because black has a route in to the king side. So these pieces are fantastic. This bishop is still dreadful on g2. Knight a4, material is now even, but black is just cruising in on the king side. Bishop h2, king f1 played, king h1 leads to disaster actually, just very quickly. Not knight g3 because actually white is winning there, but this is a really cool move, queen d6, and for example, queen f7, check, and queen h6. That's the point of moving the queen here. And that will be the end. So king f1, and now again the queen cruised in. And there really is no defense. I mean, look at these pieces. All coming in on that weakened g3 square, and that allows the knight into f4. Here, white doesn't have a defense. So, for example, a4, you can just take on g2. Yeah, king g2, queen h2 check, and queen g2, bishop h3. Winning the queen. So, fantastic attack from black there. And really, it all stems from this move, bishop g4. Provoking f3. Blocking in that bishop, which never got out, and weakening that g3 square, which was attacked with that pawn on h4. See, that's why I love playing with an isolated queen's pawn. See, it's given black space. It's given black room to play that bishop to a really good square. And yeah, it's interesting that it didn't really affect black, that these squares were occupied. So there you go. That's my recommendation against the Alapin, and you'll find all details in the new book. I'll put the link to New in Chess below. The official publication date is the 6th of November, Wednesday the 6th, but you can pre-order and it'll get to you very shortly. There you go. Very pleased with that. Perfect Christmas present, by the way. Or maybe, yeah, both together, even better. Bear it in mind. Thanks for watching.